So here we are in front of the Schlenk line, and what we want to do, of course, is to switch it on. And so in order to do that, we really need to think through the procedure quite carefully. So where do we start? Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to deal with vacuum. And the vacuum pump is over here, and you'll notice that there is an on switch right at the back here. And so we're going to turn our pump on. And if you listen to the sound of the pump, you'll notice that it's a very gentle, steady, quiet sound. Now the next thing we have to do is to actually look up here, and what we see is the tap that connects the main manifold across right to the pump. And this is a three-way tap, and we're going to turn it. Now if you listen, you can hear, right, that air is flowing in this way. So let's turn this around, and we're going to turn it by 180 degrees. And remember, this is like a T-piece, right? So the connection is now horizontally that way. And that means that our line is now under vacuum, right? So our rear manifold will be under vacuum. Now, how do we know that? Well, the thing to do is to come and check our Anschutz gauge. And if you look at the gauge, you can actually see, right, that we have a vacuum which is somewhere around 2 millimeters of mercury. It's not perfect, but it will certainly do for now. Okay, the next thing we have to do is to protect our pump, and in this Dewar flask we've actually put some liquid nitrogen, and we've done that before. We'll explain to you how to do that later on. But at this point we need to place it around our trap, and you'll notice that we have a lab jack. And so what we'll do is we will carefully raise the Dewar around it and place the lab jack underneath. Now, the liquid nitrogen is going to go a bit mad. You can see the clouds of vapor coming around. That will take a few minutes to settle. And while that's happening, we can worry about the nitrogen manifold. So with the vacuum manifold now running, what I want to do is to actually get the nitrogen going. And we need to do two things before we start. The first thing is to make sure that this tap up at the top here, which actually goes from the cylinder here on the right all the way across and up and over, right, that's open. And the second thing is we have to make sure that the tap on the end of the manifold is actually open. That's closed, that's open. Okay, so this is fine. What that means is that we'll be able to run the nitrogen from our cylinder across. So first thing, we're going to turn the cylinder on. So here we go. Notice that immediately the pressure registers on the two dials. On this gauge we have how full the cylinder is. On this side we can see what the output pressure is, and that's actually quite a significant output pressure. Nevertheless, let's just open this valve here, and let's watch. Notice how the pressure begins to drop on that gauge, and we start to get bubbling in our outlet bubbler. Now, what we want is a little bit more pressure coming through. So I'm just dialing in a little bit more on the regulator. Notice that it's bubbling quite nicely. So here we go. We've got a bit of a flow. Our regulator is clicking a little bit, but that's the way with these simple single stage regulators. We tend to find that's the case. So we're bubbling nitrogen quite well, and I want you to watch what happens when we actually open the tap. So we're going to turn it so that the green is pointing down, which tells us that nitrogen is going to flow out. And of course, at that point, notice how the bubbler stops bubbling. That's telling us that we've actually got an outflow through the tube, and I can feel it here against the back of my hand. In fact, I often like to feel it against my upper lip, and that's just very slightly more sensitive because your upper lip is damp. And when we close this tap again, notice how the bubbling resumes. And so, in a nutshell, this is what you need to do with a Schlenk line. You turn on the pump, you put the trap in place, you make sure that your manifold is fully open to vacuum, you check that the vacuum is actually okay using the Anschutz gauge, and then separately you deal with your nitrogen manifold and you first check that everything's open before you open the nitrogen regulator. And one thing which is really crucial is to always make sure that you have some kind of outflow, bearing in mind that if that stops bubbling, it either means that you've got a tap open, or alternatively, it means that there's a problem with your cylinder. And these two gauges are going to help you to diagnose what that problem is. Go out there and try it for yourself.